We may have some more folks jumping in, but we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining today for this session of peer review, where we're going to talk about metrics that matter when you're applying generative AI in regulatory writing. Just as a little bit of housekeeping before we jump in, this session is being recorded. There's also a Q&A function. We'll make sure to take some time at the end to answer any questions you may have for our guest, Mary, or myself. So please use that box within the Zoom to ask questions. Well, so nice to meet everyone. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Anita Modi. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO here at Peer AI. As we all know, AI is everywhere. There is no shortage of buzz and hype around the potential of AI to transform industries, including, of course, regulatory and medical writing. And while that excitement is real, we at Peer understand how important it is to ground that excitement in objective data and to really see the value at the end of the day of what these technologies like AI can deliver in practice. And that's why I am particularly excited about today's session, where we're not just going to talk about the possibilities with AI, but really dive into a real-world case study with concrete metrics around quality, efficiency, and reducing the overall customer burden. Here at Peer, we're working on even more case studies with different documents and complex data, so stay tuned, and we're really excited to start sharing this today. I am so thrilled to have Mary Christian from C4 Therapeutics joining us to share this exercise that we conducted earlier this year and the corresponding results. And we're so grateful to C4 for their partnership on this proof of concept exercise and honestly guiding us in this landscape that we all know is changing so quickly. So with that, Mary, I'd love for you to introduce yourself.
Absolutely, Anita. Thanks so much for including me in this panel. So I am Mary Christian. I'm currently the Senior Vice President of Regulatory at C4 Therapeutics in Massachusetts. And I lead the regulatory function and responsible for safety, pharmacovigilance, as well as medical writing there. I have about 20 plus 5 years or so of experience in the industry, most of that in regulatory, and the most recent 7 years in smaller biotech. So I can really appreciate the need for finding that right balance of regulatory, medical writing, quality, expertise, and efficiencies as we deliver important information to our regulatory colleagues.
Great. Thank you, Mary. So just to get started and jump in, I'm going to start with a little bit of an overview of Peer to really bring context to this case study. Go to the next slide. So Peer is delivering the easiest path to automation for regulatory medical writing. So taking all of the benefits of automation, particularly around speed, efficiency, and quality, and applying it in this space. We've developed a platform that's designed by our medical writers and built by our AI engineers to produce high-quality drafts of regulatory medical documents. And we specifically use AI to ingest and process different types of structured and unstructured data, use AI to author documents at scale, and use AI to provide QC support as well. And we're working with early customers today to write real documents using real data and demonstrating the value of really generative AI in this space. You can learn more on our website at www.getpeer.ai, and of course, reach out to us for more information. So in this exercise, we ultimately used the platform that you see here and applied it to a real case study and real situation. Let me go to the next slide to set that up. So of course, we wanted to show this in exercise, but I think our real goal behind the case study was to address Mary's skepticism when it came to AI and understanding what can AI even really do today and show to C4 and Mary the art of the possible. So in this exercise, what we did was author 56 patient, or the ask was to author 56 patient narratives in an oncology study using the Peer platform. These are narratives that had actually been drafted previously by C4 in-house using their own standard methodology. So we had that as a comparison purpose. And we ultimately wanted to look at a few different metrics, particularly efficiency, quality, and what the overall burden was on the customer, C4, in taking on this process. So we drafted the first drafts with this platform, We used the same exact data files that a medical writer would use. So these were unstructured PDF files of the TLFs, patient profiles, and MedWatch forms. We did no changes to the data. We tracked the medical writer hours, so what hours were put in on top of this technology platform. We also had a group of independent reviewers and writers grade the quality of both sets of narratives and specifically looked at accuracy, completeness, and readability as a way to measure and bring a quantification to the actual quality as well. And then we compared the metrics across both C4's authored patient narratives as well as the peer-generated narratives as well. Mary, do you want to talk about some of the results and our findings?
Absolutely. Yeah, as Anita mentioned, I was a skeptic coming into this exercise, and I thought the best way for us to really, for me to overcome that or to be proven correct, was to go through this kind of a case exercise or a case study. And what I at the end of it, I was actually very pleasantly surprised, as you'll see as we go through this data. But even as importantly, I think it forced us internally to look at the quality, efficiency, and the time burden or cost, you will, of doing such patient narrative authoring, and then considering the end user who will be consuming the information and for its clarity and specificity. So it was a really great exercise for both organizations. And when we did that, we did look at this with a group of my folks in-house who looked at the two versions. And I'll just qualify that we were looking at our final patient narratives because we had recently completed a study, and this was the the outputs that were generated from that study against the peer AI generated narratives first draft version. And so we found that the accuracy was very comparable in terms of the data. Peer was a little bit actually better. I mean, qualitatively a little bit better. And completeness, they were very comparable. And again, we're looking at final drafts in our case. And then readability, it actually, this was the thing that I was most skeptical about and I was most pleasantly surprised about, is that the what was generated by the platform was actually very clear and methodically presented, but in a way that was very consumable. And so the peer narratives are actually in a better place than some of the ones that were done by the more traditional methods. And that, overall the efficiency, I'll say that, we mentioned here the decreased review time was the most dramatic, as one could imagine. And I wasn't so skeptical about that, but about that quality piece of it. So in the proof of concept, we did look at the time it took to generate the narratives manually, I would say manually, with the medical writers who were doing that, and then against the time that it took for peer AI to return to us those narratives once we provided them with the data that to be where the content would be extracted from. And I can speak to the time it took for us, which was that 336 hours. And then so by narrative, it was roughly 6 hours per narrative. And these are complicated oncology patients. So those are pretty heavy data. And you'll see on the right-hand column there, the Peer AI platform, and Anita can speak to that, how they got to those numbers. But it was literally, once we hand them over and their platform was built, the time they were returned to us was incredible. So I don't know if Anita wants to speak to how
I can add to that.
Yeah.
We looked at the overall time that the medical writer basically would have spent on top of what was run here, and the generation time came to 20 hours, of which 4 hours was actually processing the LLM, running through the data, and 16 hours of, call it, medical writer time. So really about 20 minutes when you look per narrative and amortize it over that. So about, call it, 17x difference when you just look at it from that scale, from an efficiency standpoint.
Mhm. Perfect. Yeah. And in terms of the burden, and really the speed to doing this, and then readability of the final output, we were just really impressed as a, as a consumer of the patient narratives. If we were uh, if we had a larger number of narratives or had to reproduce this for some reason, maybe for a safety update or something else, it was really dramatic how much more quickly we could get to that first draft place, and then really would be able to finalize those in quite an efficient manner. Um, and then, the output delivered to us was, seamlessly working into then our QC review. And, we really could have done this in much, much faster time. And, that's really what we're all most concerned about is, of course, the quality, and but the speed in doing this when you have patients who are waiting for great molecules, for great products that could transform lives. You want to be sure that the preparation of your regulatory documentation is not taking you too long.
Yeah. And I'll add as well, I think part of the reason we, mutually agreed to sort of measure this is given our past lives with innovation and with adding new technology, it's always important to say, like, what is the friction or what's the investment? And so sort of measuring this on with the sense of how much does this add any additional work for the team and what does this look like? And so here at Peer, we're very transparent that there is configuration that has to happen when this work is done, and we measure that here. It was 74 hours. I think adding some context was mostly because here at Peer we hadn't seen MedWatch forms, and so we were working through some of the logic on how you take that in and reconcile it. But it was all done off the critical path and sort of absorbed by the Peer AI team. And like you mentioned, Mary, we use the same data files. I think your team didn't have to modify anything in your data pipeline or change anything. And we presented back, comparable docx to take into your review workflow. So also looking not just at, what is quality, what is efficiency, but what is the work that has to be done at the end of the day to take on an innovation or, new technology like this as well.
Mm-hmm. That's absolutely right. And I think the utilization of the medical writer's expertise and time is much better placed, in my opinion, at looking at the overall clinical study report and making sure that we're telling the important information around the molecule and around the study that was conducted and how that fits into the presentation of data, for the regulators, and others to review, and taking this kind of activity that's probably not the best use of medical writers' time, frankly, when they can be really helping us storyboard the clinical study report or understanding what happens next. These are the kinds of things that I think the medical writers are in a unique position to be able to contribute.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a QR code on the bottom right here, which links over to the full case study if you're looking for more detail. But I think these are really the highlights we wanted to share. And I guess with that, Mary, I'll shift into some questions we had for you. I'll stop sharing my screen. We talked a little bit about kind of your skepticism. I guess what was the most surprising or unexpected outcome, when you and your team think about this exercise or generally using AI here?
Mm-hmm. We joked at the beginning of this that, I know, when you had said that it could be very quick, we can do this very promptly once we set up the system and set up the platform in a way that's conducive to receiving your data. I thought, well, I actually, kind of joked about this black box concept where, okay, how do I know that's actually that the platform is generating it, and it's not like you have a host of medical writers in the background just scrambling around, and so clearly that didn't happen because the turnaround was incredible. But I think my biggest concern really was about quality and the speed. Number one, the quality, right? So I always want we always want to be putting forward the highest quality, highest reliable data that we can toward the regulatory agencies. And then, doing it, as I mentioned earlier, quickly is important because patients are waiting. But then considering how readable it is in the end, like how our our internal folks, but also the regulatory bodies that are asked to review this information, can they hear the story? Can they understand what's happening well? And that was probably the most surprising thing for me in the end, actually, was that level of quality and readability. It didn't feel like it came out of some of you see some of the platforms where it's you put in garbage, but you put in reasonable information, but it will spit out to you something that doesn't make any sense. That wasn't the case here, and I think that's probably resonates from the work that you put in up front around building the right platform and being able to extract the data from the PDFs as you could. But that was the biggest surprise for me.
Yeah. Yeah, we hear that a lot. Oh my gosh, I can't believe, this was done by technology and not a person. I agree. I'm gonna guess that there are folks on this call who are starting to explore AI, especially with, 2025 planning around the corner. What advice do you have for these teams, as they think about, exploring AI to really just maximize their own success as an organization?
Mhm. So I would say to that one, Anita, just to be open to partnering with someone like Peer, where you have experts on that side and you have medical writing expertise in house, to tell you maybe where's the best use of this and maybe where's not such a great use of it. And I think that asking those kinds of questions of the organization to say, this is the challenges before us, and how do you suggest we can best apply, generative AI or machine learning in some way? Because I don't know enough, honestly, to say that this is the best use, or this might not be a great use. And we've talked a little bit about some situations where maybe, still the old-fashioned way makes much more sense for certain applications. But for others, it just seems like there are, you've had experience working with other sponsors, working with, other organizations where you can say, hey, we've done this really effectively, and the output's amazing. So, so I would say just to be open to asking those kinds of questions.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Um, I think you, Mary, and the team, just having done exercises like this and being open, are very much at the forefront. I think, looking ahead, how do you see AI continuing to, if applications in AI continue to evolve in regulatory writing? And are there trends or innovations, that you and your team are excited about?
Yeah, I think the possibilities are limitless, frankly. But I think that kind of some of the lowest hanging fruit are ways that we can, and there are some tools that have begun this process already, where you're pulling through data or information from one document to another along the continuum of development. So you consider that, that first IND with your first draft protocol and an IB or investigator brochure, and then how that evolves over time. So there are many logical ways that you can pull information through those documents and into the clinical study report, into the ISS and ISC. I mean, you could think of those as just they're going to be table stakes pretty soon. I think
Yeah,
we're using technology like this. But there's probably a lot of other ways. We talked a little bit about labels, and how kind of complicated that is and challenging that is. But it's always, start with the end in mind, and that's how you design your development program. That's how you design,
yeah,
if who your target population is, and what your molecule can do. So I think there are just I probably am at a point where I couldn't even imagine all the ways we can use it effectively, but the regulators are actually on it, and they are looking forward to being recipients of this information in this way. And they're asking themselves questions: how do we evaluate this differently or the same? What are the new kinds of things that we can do, or we should be doing? And what are the new areas we should be looking for to underscore risk, or to underscore where we may find quality issues? I remember in the very beginning of my career, one of the things that some of the regulators would often express frustrations about were things like, we'll review your IND, and then maybe the first draft protocol. But then when you get to your clinical study report, You may use different words or terminology to as your
Mhm.
story kind of has evolved. And then when you get to the integrated summary of efficacy, you may use even different terminology. And then you pull up to the clinical overview and you're using different words and terms. And every time we switch gears and using different words and terms, they feel like they have to go back and make sure that it's exactly what you said you were going to do and go back. But when you're applying this kind of technology, it's actually seamless, and you no one's doing that intentionally misleading in a misleading way, but we're doing it just because we're human.
Right.
And when we can leverage something that will kind of check us and say, nope, that's not the way you described it here. So you have to pull it through the way it was originally anticipated.
Right. Right. And in a way, I think what I keep hearing is those are the parts of the things that medical writers don't necessarily want to spend their time doing, thinking about what's the word or the consistency, but if I can automate or address those, then it frees me up to do some of the other strategic pieces you were mentioning.
Absolutely. Those critical thinking, the contributing to the team to say, hey, this isn't the best way to do this, or have you thought about doing it in a different way? Those are the things you have a medical writer with years of experience in the industry. That's what I want them to be
Right.
telling me, right? Is not necessarily how I can um I don't know how I can simply use that same word throughout, right? I mean, that's great and it's helpful, but that's probably not the best use of their talents.
Yeah, I think so too. All right, last question from me because I'm seeing a lot from the audience. Now that you have had this experience and seen this sort of value, how do you think about, C4 more broadly planning to incorporate AI in the future?
I was looking at some of the ways I would do that, and we've been chatting as well. But and I always write down the word, accelerating. How do we accelerate drug development? How do we accelerate whether it's a pathway or a technology? And I just have to keep coming back to say to myself that those terms, even the term accelerate is probably hackney. At this point, everything is really fast,
Yeah,
and it's not even about accelerating development anymore. This is about keeping up.
yeah,
As a small organization and some of the small biotechs that I've worked with, they are doing things, we are doing things innovatively and challenging the status quo, challenging the way it was done before. And so I think this is actually just the way it will be um, moving forward. This is just going to become, again, table stakes. It's just going to become the baseline of how quickly we have to move.
yeah,
And I think that once larger organizations embrace that as well, they're just, they'll be learning from us, from smaller companies, and they're learning how to move more quickly, which is a great thing for patients in the end. That's all wonderful.
it comes back. Yeah, I think that's wonderful. And like I said, you and your team really are at the forefront. So thank you for sharing this perspective. Um, I'm going to shift into audience questions because there's quite a few, and I'll try my best to sort of bucket these and get through as many as we can. There's a couple in here, Mary, around the efficiency gains and what you see in terms of potential from reallocating those resources. So what areas do you see medical writers continuing to contribute as part of the study team? What opportunities do you see just in terms of reallocating resources? I guess I would say across probably the development team as well.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. So, as I mentioned, we're a small company, a small organization, and I've worked with small ones for the last 6 or 7 years. And so resources are always very precious. And so even what smaller organizations will do have really efficient small medical writing teams. Right? And I'm using the term teams loosely. Sometimes it's a team of one or two people, right? And then we'll rely on contract support to kind of do some of the heavy lift of the more routine and routine activities. So if we could, instead of relying on consultants to do that, but really embed that in the way we work, that does free up the medical writer from having to oversee consultants and manage those kinds of contracts and things that I don't really want a medical writer worrying about, honestly. But I want to see that person sitting at the development team table and helping the early development of a protocol design or having the team think critically about where does this asset fit best. And medical writers are often the best researchers in the world.
Mhm.
I mean, they
Yes.
can go back and do and explore precedents and other things that have been done in the same space and critically analyze maybe what others have done and have
Mhm.
not done so terribly well or failed at, or that we can learn from, and impart that right into the development program and the clinical development plans that we establish. So that's where I would rather see medical writers really contribute, as well as doing these more strategic documents, as you mentioned, whether it's briefing documents for engaging with health authorities or clinical study reports or building NDAs and BLAs.
Yeah, I think that's right. And that there's a question actually about, kind of building off that. Where else do you think platforms like Peer, will result in, or will be able to offer kind of gains in speed? And, like you were saying, what does that mean in terms of getting medicines to patients faster? I know we had this conversation a lot as we were talking about, 6-month roadmap, 12-month roadmap, and so on.
Exactly right. So I mentioned the label. I think that's one,
Mhm.
and it's also in the maintenance of regulatory applications,
Mhm.
especially. I really
Yeah,
see that that's a huge opportunity, where I've also been on the other end of the spectrum where I was managing mature brands or established brands, and once we have approvals in 50 or 100 countries of the world, maintaining those applications and updating labels, updating the safety data, the PSURs, DSURs, making sure that the information is shared more broadly, consistently. Those opportunities seem like they're just ready for innovation and disruption, and I
yeah,
think that's exactly what generative AI can do.
right. Right, there's a good question here that I know we talked about quite a bit, which is, were there any, or generally maybe when you think about AI, are there compliance concerns? Or, did the fact that there was kind of a human involved in this, called human in the loop, abstract this away? And how do you think about that maybe today and when we start to think about really AI at scale? And is there anything we
Mhm.
can do, to mitigate that too?
Yeah, so that's where I would actually want to hear from the regulators.
Yeah,
So I think those are the kinds of things that FDA is struggling with or considering, and other regulators, the EMA and others around AI and how it's used well in drug development and drug approvals. For me, the idea of having a human always in the loop, I think we talked about that first draft was really the not necessarily the hardest part, but the most time consuming part.
right,
But then having that basis, still the QC part is going to be critical at the end of the game. That's always going to be important. Um, but having a human kind of reviewing that so that to ensure that it makes sense, but more importantly, tells the story of the patient in this case, or of the molecule, or of the development program. I think that's it's not going to be replaced, in my
yeah,
opinion. I don't think that's ever going to be replaced. But I think as we may look for other ways to optimize that interjection of the human. We talked a little bit about the a corollary to this to some degree, which was in risk-based monitoring
yeah,
in clinical oversight or clinical quality. In my past life, I was working with establishing those risk-based monitoring kind of processes and tools and how that's done well. And it just changes the way you look at monitoring clinical trials. And I think this
right.
is going to be the same. We just have to think differently around how we do that, and making sure that we as an industry do that in a way that's consistent across. So, but I think it's all up to all of us, yourselves as providers, but also all the medical writers and regulatory folks who may be here listening to this, to say what does it look like for you? What do you think are the opportunities? And asking those questions of how do we partner with someone who can do that well? Is it something that we best own in-house? Is it something we rely on for a partner? I mean, I'm never going to be an AI expert, and I'm perfectly happy to say that. But others may be, and some larger organizations are building that capability in-house. So having to understand where that best can be used and utilized, I think is up to all of us to design the right way.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I think we feel pretty strongly up here that there should always be a human in the loop. And we know being in this day in and day out, like there are limitations with the technology, and it's really important to be aware of what AI can do and what AI can't do.
Mhm.
There's also a lot that AI is never going to be able to automate, which is probably your internal discussions on how to present the story and some of those politics and whatnot. So we've really, always thought about first draft support where we can, and I think. I think the technology will continue to get better, but that is really critical from our standpoint too.
Mhm.
All right, I see quite a few questions here. Okay, that's a great one. As a fellow regulatory expert, the question is, what was the tipping point for you, Mary, when it comes to embracing Gen AI, and how do you think about trusting these technologies?
Interesting. So I wouldn't exactly call myself an expert, but I have been in this world a little while. Um, and I would say I'm not fully on board yet, right? But I also recognize that I cannot be on the sidelines anymore.
Mm,
It's impossible to, when you see how effectively we can utilize these tools and how importantly they can change the way we work in a great way. Um, I'm if I were in high school today, I would probably, if I were a teacher in high school, I know I'd be scared to death. But if I were in high school today, I was joking with some other colleagues around, you know, the what do we call them? The crib sheets or the cliff notes we used to have for books. Well, you don't need that anymore, whether it's ChatGPT or someone else can do that. We used to joke about Wikipedia being like it's not a great resource. Okay, it's not for a lot of things, but for some things it is. And similarly, some of these other platforms are just they're pervasive in everything we do. If I put do a, and I'm not going to put a company, but if I do a Google search today, I not only get what I used to get, I now get a Chat GPT kind of interpretation of that search.
right.
Did you really want to look for this? Did you really
Yeah.
want to look for that? And so it's all around us. I don't think we can. I can't object to it anymore. It's around us, and it's actually doing really wonderful things in a lot of spaces. So it's probably off on a tangent, but I think it's something we just have to embrace at this stage. And I'm happy to do it after this experience. I will actually say that I can think, and every time we chat, there's more things I can think of in terms of utility for such platform. And so I just think that the next generation of regulatory folks will see even more, and will really bring this even further forward. It's funny. Even this summer, we had a regulatory intern uh, working with us, and when someone said to me, well, what kind of skills do you want? And I said, I don't, regulatory is kind of a general science, life science experience, but it may be someone with medical writing, or maybe somebody, I don't know, safety, I don't know. And then the first CV that I got, or resume, I guess, was a young woman who is really interested in regulatory sciences, and but her she's dual majoring is in computer science.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, yes, yes, absolutely. That's exactly who we need. And she said, I want to learn about applying bioinformatics and
Wow.
human. And I said, yes, yes, this is exactly what. And she was an incredible resource to us. Um, so I think that even the CV of the future for regulatory sciences will look even different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. I agree. I'm going to shift a bit because there's several questions in here about peer and capabilities. And what I'll do is I'll answer several of them, but invite folks to reach out for more detail that we can provide outside of the webinar. I think there's some questions in here. What areas beyond narratives is peer providing support? What other documents can peer write? And I think there's a question even here from someone in tech ops who asked if we're doing work with documents such as module 3. And I think the short answer is yes. I think what we've built up here is a we need a better marketing term, regulatory document generator, which is taking in different types of structured and unstructured data to author different, structured documents at the end of the day. So after, we started with patient narratives, we've been working on, we've done CSRs, we've done sections of module 3 as well, building out kind of getting to the full IND. We are just about to start with protocols and informed consent. We're doing work on investigator brochure. And I think from a pure technical standpoint, we see so many similarities in the workflow and how you build this. And I think opportunity throughout. And I'll say, seeing results very similar to what we talked about today when you look at quality, when you look at efficiency, and as well as the customer burden. So if folks are interested in learning more about our roadmap and some of those capabilities, I encourage you to reach out or look at our website, and we'd be happy to share more about our roadmap as well. There are some questions here about configuration as well, and how that was set up. The question here is, when you say 74 hours, was it 74 person hours? And yes, that's exactly right. So it took 74 person hours to set that up. We did it over the course of, I think it was like a week and a half or 2 weeks. And a lot of that was really to make sure that we could properly process MedWatch forms in this case, and make sure that they could be included in sort of the templates that we had built out for patient narratives as well. And I would say
that
that's
because,
different. Yeah, sorry, go
was
ahead.
that because you had used SIOMs before? Is that what
We
you
had
were
used sort of
using?
SIOMs. We had used mostly TFLs for that in the past. And I would say, when you think about configuration, and happy to talk offline with whoever answered this question or asked this question, a lot of times that really depends on sort of what is the data format and are there differences in the template. But I think we've been able to sort of configure everything quickly on the scale of, hours to days to maybe a few weeks, depending on the scale. But really, again, doing it off the critical path. And there was a question here specifically around MedWatch. I think Jenny Thayer asked it over here. But how did we make decisions around MedWatch versus the clinical database, which is a challenge? And I think I remember, Mary, we had a pretty open discussion on what is the logic that we should apply, and are there things that we should flag? I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add here, but it was a very explicit discussion we had around the logic.
Yeah, it was. And that's, I think, because we were trying to replicate the activity that we had done.
Yeah.
And so, if we were doing it a priori, we might have done it a little bit differently. And this was also a kind of a unique situation of a clinical trial. So, it wasn't your standard uh, activity, I would say, or even circumstance where we would be planning for a clinical trial that would ultimately go into an application. This was a little bit different. So I think the fact that probably guided us there was that we had done it that way for our own internal reasons,
Yeah.
and then you wanted to replicate what we had done.
Yeah. And I think the question we often ask ourselves is, what is the logic you would be applying in your current workflow today? Like, if you're a medical writer, had these two data sets, how would they decide how to reconcile these different data? And that's exactly what we're sort of programming and logically applying at the end of the day. So it's sort of working through that same exact, workflow. All right, I'm looking at some of these other questions. Actually, I think we answered most of them. Oh, there's a question. Do you work with large pharma, development teams, innovation teams? I think the answer is yes. We work with, I would say, medical writers at the end of the day, wherever the writing is happening and wherever this work is ultimately happening, which we know is every organization we've been able to support. I think we actually like bringing in a diversity in our customers across biotechs like C4 Therapeutics or larger pharma, or even the CROs, because when we think about it, the problem space we're addressing is medical writing. It's not building custom software that only fits, one company or type of company as well. Great. These are great questions. Just going through, see if there's any more we can address. All right, question for Pierre. Can you break down what happens in the 20 minutes per document? That's a great question. So what we looked at here, I think it was about 20 hours, 16 hours were spent with the medical writer sort of iterating on the output that was there. So using the platform to actually adjust any of the prompts that needed to happen. And 4 hours was where the LLM was actually ingesting that data that was loaded and authoring those documents as well. So when you break it out across a per per narrative. That's sort of how you can allocate the 20 minutes. So it's both the ingestion and the authoring and any sort of iteration that would happen through the technology platform. Great. And there's a question, for the peer team, do you have medical writers in-house and what role do they play? So yes, we feel very strongly that if you're building, the software for medical writers, you need that expertise in your DNA. We have medical writers in-house, we have them as advisors, we have them on our board. We have really tried to infuse medical writing thinking throughout the company. And we think that's critical when you want to apply technology in a way that adds value. The role that they play here is multiple. So the medical writers have helped us think about what is the workflow in a platform like this? What are the requirements when it comes to writing good documents? What does good mean in this space when you look at quality, let alone your sort of benchmarks? And making sure, any of the sort of iteration that has to happen is considered as well. So I would say our medical writers are working hand in hand with our AI engineers to build and really think about the right solution in this space too.
And I think that was evident, Anita, in the calls that we had with our team and your team, kind of going through as we built as you were kind of modifying your platform or your capabilities to meet the need, is that, having our medical writer talking to yours and having, our safety colleagues, being there to kind of provide their point of view, but then the comfort talking to other medical writers, I think was reassuring that they had, their experience as well, doing things, in the traditional way and how they would see opportunities to do things differently. So that was really reassuring to us to see that those skills were being applied as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. Great. I think we've hit most of these questions. I appreciate having such an engaged audience, and I'll say that we at on the peer side, and I'm sure Barry would be happy to continue the conversation. But I just wanted to pause here and say thank you, Mary, for joining us and for providing honestly your leadership, your perspective on the space that is evolving so quickly. So thank you again. Thank you for everyone for joining and for being so engaged. We are going to continue these sort of peer review webinars and sessions where we hear honestly from the industry experts. Our next one will be on November 14th, where we're actually going to dive in with technical experts and look at different applications that use LLMs and some of the practical insights when you think about using LLMs to do high value knowledge work across the life science space. So it should be an interesting conversation with sort of the other side of the puzzle. But thank you again, Mary. Thank you again to this audience, and we'll make sure to make this recording available too.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.